Persia, Iran, in the Bible is referred to as Elam. Elam is a name that Persia was first known by. Elam in the Bible is one of the sons of Shem. You had the children of Noah. All mankind today are descended from the children of Noah. The three sons of Noah were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Now, some people are surprised at this because it would imply that the Iranians also are Semites related to the Israelites, whereas conventional history, at least as it is now understood, classifies the Iranians as Indo-Europeans, as Aryans, related to peoples of Europe, and not related to peoples of the Middle East, even though they live in the Middle East. So anyone who has been to Persia, knows Persians, has met Persians, understands that this is not exactly correct, that the people of Iran are Middle Eastern in many respects, or have intermixed with the Middle Eastern people. And also, the Middle Eastern people themselves are a mixture, as are the Europeans. At all events, the Bible has its way of classifying nations, and the biblical classification is as good as any other, if not much better. So we have the sons of Shem, were Elam, Ashur, Arphaxad, Lud, and Aram. The sons of Shem were Elam, Ashur, Arphaxad, Lud, and Aram. Elam, as we said, is Persia, Iran. Ashur is Assyria. Lud is Lydia and western Turkey, but from there the portions of Italy were populated. Lydia helped give rise to the Etruscans, who were the forerunners of the Romans in Italy. Whereas Aram is another name for Assyria in the Bible, in biblical Hebrew. So we had the sons of Shem were Elam, Ashur, Arphaxad, Lud, and Aram. Arphaxad was an ancestor of Abraham. Abraham gave rise to the Hebrew nations. Arphaxad begat Selah, who begat Eba, who begat Peleg, who begat Ru, who begat Sarug, who begat Nahor. Nahor begat Terach, Terach begat Abram, Nahor, and Haran. The name Abram was changed to Abraham later. Abraham begat Ishmael and Isaac. Ishmael is the forerunner of the Arabs, or at least of the dynamic portion of the Arabic peoples derived from Ishmael, the son of Abraham. The brother of Ishmael was Isaac. Isaac begat Jacob and Esau. Esau in Hebrew was also pronounced as Esau. Esau was also known as Edom, Edom meaning red. Edom gave rise to parts of the peoples of Europe, including the emperors of Rome and many kings and nobles of other nations in Europe, including Germany, and also among some of the Asian nations such as Japan and China. We also find elements from Edom, from Esau, who were important, historically important. The brother of Esau was Israel, Jacob. Jacob was renamed Israel. See Genesis 32:28, Genesis 35:10. Jacob, that is Israel, begat 12 sons. These were the 12 tribes of Israel. They're divided into two sections: the Jews of Judah and the lost 10 tribes. The lost 10 tribes became parts of the Western peoples, including those of Britain and America. And as we mentioned, the forefather of the tribes of Israel were Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. In the time of Abraham, we find Elam recorded as part of a group of 4 kings. In Genesis chapter 14, we find that Amraphel, the king of Shinar. Shinar is the equivalent of Sumer in archaeological terms. Sumer was one of the earliest kingdoms known, at least according to archaeological findings in history. In the Bible it is referred to as Shinar. Amraphel was the king of Shinar. We had Arioch, the king of Elasar, Kedor the king of Elam, and Tida, king of nations, or Goyim. That was the name of a people, Goyim. And they made war against the king of Sodom and other local kings in the area east of the Jordan. And at that time, Lot, the nephew of Abraham, lived close to Sodom in the area east of the Jordan. And at that time, the climate was different, the situation was different than it is now. And at that time, the area was quite fertile, verdant, green, and well populated. So these four kings, Amraphel, Arioch, Kedar, of Elam, and Tida, they made war against the area east of the Jordan. And they attacked and they destroyed cities and they took a lot of plunder and they returned and they went their way, but they also took with them Lot, the nephew of Abraham. They took him captive. Lot was taken captive by these four kings. And Abraham at that time was still known as Abraham. Before being called Abraham, he was known as Abram. And he was informed as to what had happened to Lot. So he took his trained servants, he had trained servants, warriors, 318 men, and also allies, Anna, Ashkol, and Mamre, and they pursued the four kings and they overtook them. It says in Genesis 14, now when Abram heard that his brother, by brother he means his nephew, Lot, heard that his brother was taken captive, he armed his 318 trained servants who were born in his own house, and he went in pursuit as far as Dan. He is referring apparently to Dan in the Galilee, some distance to the north. He divided his forces against them by night, and he and his servants attacked them and pursued them as far as Hobah, which is north of Damascus in Syria, and he overtook them and he defeated them. So he brought back all the goods, and he brought back his brother Lot and his goods, as well as the women and the people who had been taken captive. Then after that, when he brought them back, he restored the possessions he had taken to the people to whom they belonged. And we're told then Melchizedek, king of Salem. Salem was another name for Jerusalem in that time. He brought out bread and wine. He was a priest of God Most High. And he blessed him, and he blessed Abraham, and he said, blessed be Abraham of God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth. And he blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hands. And he gave him a tithe of all. And Abraham gave a tithe of what he had to Melchizedek, who was a priest of God Almighty. So this tells us that the practice of tithing has been known from earliest times. And tithing has a value of its own. It helps a person look after himself, meet his needs, and also, according to different connotations, can rescue you from your enemies and bring you back from exile. And it has, we are promised in several places that everyone who tithes will be blessed because of it. At all events, this action of Abraham, he took his men and he went out, and with a relatively small number of trained soldiers, and he defeated the four kings, and because of that he received a blessing. So this has been taken as representing many aspects of the future history of the Israelite nation. One of them, they tell us, is that it represents the conquest of the land of Israel. The greater land of Israel stretches from the Nile to the Euphrates. And we are told here the four kings had conquered all regions of Transjordan, Edom and the Negev, and then all of Canaan. They crossed all of Canaan. And Abraham overtook them near Dan, which is close to the northern border of Israel, defeated them, pursued them up to Damascus, and he inherited all the fruits of their conquests and everything from Elath to Dan, including Damascus and South Syria. And this is claimed by the Israelites as part of Greater Canaan, that is the greater of Israel, the two borders of Israel and Abraham, and doing this foreshadowed the future conquests of the Israelite nations. As to, in the cosmic symbolism, mention this parallelism, and we have another symbolic meaning of the actions of Abraham. Midrash Rabbah. Rabbi Abin said Midrash was written about anywhere from 100 BCE to 500 CE, sometimes later. It's a compilation of different exegesis of different commentaries on the Bible, written, attributed in some way or other to the authors of the Talmud. Talmud was written by a great number of rabbis, so it's a compilation in its own right. And they not only were what they said put together and became and edited to become part of the Talmud, but they also said other things that were not necessarily included in the Talmud, but which are also of great value. And some of these other things are found in Midrashim. So Midrashim says that these four kings, that is Kedor Omer king of Elam, and Tidal king of Goyim, and Amraphel king of Shinar, and Ariel king of Elasar, they represent four kingdoms: the kingdom of Babylon, the kingdom of Media, the kingdom of Yavan, that is Greece, and the kingdom empire of Edom. In other words, these four kings represent four different stages of civilization. And the non-Israelite nations who will be the foremost elements at that time, with whom the Israelites will have to cope with as subjects or as competitors, as enemies or as friends, but this will be part of our reality throughout the ages. So that's how the Midrash understands it. Now, Maimonides, who's a great commentator, and we use his work fairly often. He's also known as Ramban. He lived 1194 to 1270. And he has a different explanation. And he said, this event was experienced by Abraham to teach the four kingdoms will arise to rule over the world. But in the end times, his sons will overcome, and the four kingdoms will all fall into their hands. And they will restore to themselves all the property and booty that the four kingdoms had taken. That is, in the end times, the world will be dominated by four different forces, non-Israelite forces. Four of them. Four different peoples will rule over the earth in the end times, and Israelites will have to cope with these four different enemies or different Gentile agencies. And when Abraham defeated the four kings, he said was doing that, he set the pattern. He made a president, that Israelite, a president with a C, that is a forerunner, an initiation, an initial act that would enable his children to do what they had to do in the end times. Just as he fought against the four kings, so too the Israelites in the end times had to fight against four kings. Just as in his time, the four kings were the most powerful nations on earth, so too will the Israelites in the end times have to face up to four kings who will be the most powerful non-Israelite power entities facing them.